So you've opened your Roth IRA account or your taxable brokerage or your 401k. You've connected your bank account and you've transferred the money in there, and now you're ready to pick investments. But how the heck do you do that? In this video, we're gonna discuss exactly what I would do if I was starting over from scratch right now. Hey, what's up? It's Clobear. Thanks for coming back to my channel where we talk about all things money. So I polled my audience on Instagram this week and I wanted to find out what kind of content did you guys want to see? And everybody kept asking, what do I invest in? Can you explain what to do once you've opened a Roth IRA? Can you help me analyze some investments and things like that? Now, we've got to get something really clear here. What I provide on this channel is not financial advice. I don't know anything about you, so I can't tell you, hey, go buy these things. That would be illegal and I'm not trying to get sued. What I can do is explain to you what I would do if I were in your situation right now. So if I was just now starting a Roth IRA, how would I invest that money knowing what I know right now? So that's exactly what we're gonna do in this video. I'm gonna break it down so you can see what I personally would do if I were starting over at the age of 30 with a Roth IRA account. So we'll get right to it, but before we do, be sure to hit like, be sure to hit subscribe. About 50% of my viewers are not yet subscribers, and it's free for you to do and it helps me out a lot. So if you could just go ahead and do that, I would appreciate it. Before we talk about what I would put into my Roth IRA if I were starting out, let's talk about what a Roth IRA is in a nutshell. So a Roth IRA is a type of investment account that allows you to put post-tax dollars into it so that you can then buy investments and those investments will grow tax-free. Roth IRAs have a contribution limit, which means that you can only put in $6,000 into a Roth IRA if you're under the age of 50. If you are over the age of 50, every year you can put in $7,000 to catch up for retirement. Now, Roth IRAs, one of the things that people really get confused with Roth IRAs is that Roth IRAs are not actually investments themselves. They are containers for your investments. So what you do is you open the Roth IRA account, you connect it to your bank account, you move money from your bank account into the Roth IRA, and then you buy investments. You need to not forget about that part because that part is incredibly important. And so many people, because they think that a Roth IRA is already an investment, they miss out on the fact that they didn't buy investments, and you need to purchase investments once you move the money into your Roth IRA. If you do not buy investments with the money inside of your Roth IRA, then that money is just going to sit there basically collecting dust. Now, what's really cool about a Roth IRA is that the money that you put in there when you purchase investments, those investments grow tax-free. So let's say you bought $6,000 worth of Apple stock, and in 10 years that $6,000 is then worth $16,000. That means you just made $10,000 completely tax-free. The government is not going to ask you to pay taxes on that $10,000 that your money made because it's inside of a Roth IRA account. The same thing applies to Roth 401ks. The money inside of a Roth 401k, sans your employer match, is tax-free when you take it out in retirement, which is pretty cool. The reason that's so great is because a lot of us think taxes are only going to continue to go up, so if you confront the tax bill now, you might save money on taxes in retirement. Another really cool thing about Roth IRAs is that Roth IRAs allow you to take out the money you put into the account at any time. The money you put into the account is considered a contribution. Those contributions, like I said, you can access at any time, tax-free, penalty-free. Now, however, when your contributions grow and they become earnings, that $6,000 you put in is still a contribution, but let's say that money grows to $16,000. That means you then have $10,000 in earnings. The earnings, keep in mind, you cannot access until you're 59 and a half years old and you have had the Roth IRA account for at least 5 years. So now that we've clarified what a Roth IRA account is, let's talk about what I would do if I were starting over right now. If I was starting a Roth IRA account from scratch right now at the age of 30, the first thing I would do is create a 2-fund portfolio. I think often new investors get really overwhelmed with all the options that are available for them out there, when really you can be pretty well diversified with as little as 2 different index funds. Now, the more popular version version of a simple fund portfolio is known as the 3-fund portfolio. The 3-fund portfolio is a portfolio that was founded by Jack Bogle, who is the founder of Vanguard. Vanguard is one of the largest brokerages in the US, and it's also the founder of index funds. Now, a 3-fund portfolio contains 3 different index funds that represent essentially every single stock in the whole world and a diversified bond portfolio. Now, the way that you accomplish this is by purchasing one total US stock market index fund, one total international index fund, and one total bond fund. Now, what are those things, you're probably wondering? A total US market index fund contains every single stock in the US market inside of it. What's cool about that is for just one purchase, you can literally own a small share of every single stock in the US market. So the Apples, the Amazons, the Googles of the world are all inside of that portfolio, as well as the Lululemons, the AMCs, the GameStops of the world as well. And what's great is you did not have to spend your time trying to figure out how to purchase each individual stock. Instead, you just buy the entire stock market. Now, an example of some total US stock market funds are listed here. But keep in mind, this is not me telling you to go buy these funds. This is just me telling you so you can go do your further research. You can go look up these funds and find out if they're right for your portfolio. Now that we know what a US total stock market fund is, you can probably guess what a total international stock market fund is. You guessed correctly. It has every single stock in the international market inside of it. Some examples of international funds are listed here. Again, do your own research. So think about it this way. You could literally have every single stock in the entire world just by purchasing those 2 funds. But what about the bond fund? So another part of the 3-fund portfolio is that you also include a small portion of your investments into a US total bond market fund. Now, based off of the title of the investment, you could probably guess that it's going to contain a representative sampling of all of the bonds in the US market. So again, you don't have to spend your time learning or understanding what different types of bonds there are in the world when there are thousands upon thousands. Instead, you can just buy them all with a US total bond market fund. An example of some total US bond funds are listed here. Now you'll notice when we first started this video, I said that if I was starting my Roth IRA from scratch, I would probably start with 2 funds, not 3 funds. And the reason for that is because I'm 30 years old right now. I don't have a lot of need personally for bonds inside of my portfolio. The reason for that is because bonds are really for wealth preservation. Stocks, on the other hand, are really for wealth accumulation. Right now, knowing that I have about 35 years-ish before I plan to retire, I don't really have much focus on wealth preservation because I'm trying to build my wealth right now. Because of that, as well as because of my risk tolerance and my time horizon, I don't really have any bonds in my portfolio, nor do I really want any bonds in my portfolio. That will change the closer I get to my retirement age. So I'm 30 right now, but by the time I'm 45 or 50, I might start to slowly introduce bonds into my portfolio because I'm moving from wealth accumulation into wealth preservation. So if I were starting out a new Roth IRA today, I would probably buy just 2 funds. A US total stock market index fund like one of these, and a total international stock market index fund like one of these. Now, that's all I would do for a while. The reason is because you can only put in $6,000 into a Roth IRA every year. Now, the reason I would only pick those 2 funds is because I don't want to make it all that complicated when I'm first starting out. A lot of new investors feel this overwhelm when looking at all the different types of investments that are available out there. And really, that's something that you can worry about once you need to get further diversified, in my opinion. If it were me, I would keep it simple. I would probably do 80 to 90% in the US stock market index fund and then 10 to 20% in the international index fund. Now, the reason I go so heavy on the US large cap fund is because I believe in the US market. And when we compare the average annual returns of the US market versus the entire international market, the difference is pretty stark. Now, by doing that, by putting 80 to 90% of my portfolio in US large cap stock, I am taking the risk of not being diversified enough in the international market. But because I'm aware of the risks and I'm also aware of the potential rewards and downfalls, I am comfortable putting 80 to 90% of my portfolio in a US total stock market index fund, knowing what the average annual returns of the international market have been over the years. Now, because I'm saying 80 to 90% of my portfolio would go inside of a US total stock market index fund, I am taking the risk of not being diversified enough in the international market. Now, even though that international market performance has not been as good as the US market performance over the last several decades, the reason you may still want to consider international inside of your portfolio is because the international market is not directly correlated to how the US market is going to do. What I mean by that is if the US market goes up, that does not automatically mean that the international market is also going to go up. Just like if the international market goes down, that does not automatically mean that the US market is going to go down. Think about it this way. Diversification becomes even more important the closer you get to retirement. Let's say at the age of 65, you are 100% invested in the US stock market, and the day you retire, the US stock market crashes down 30%. You then have the dilemma of not knowing where your money is going to come from. If you don't have an emergency fund or if you don't have money invested outside of the US stock market, you're going to have no other choice but to take your retirement from your US stocks that are currently crashed. We do not want to have to take from our stocks when our stocks are down. If we can avoid it, we would like to avoid it. Again, that is why diversification becomes much more important the older you get, or the closer you get to accessing the money. Now, think about it this way. Let's say you got to 65 years old and 70% of your portfolio was invested in the US stock market, where 30% of your portfolio was invested in the international market. Again, the day you retire, the US market crashes 30%, but that's okay because you have 30% of your portfolio invested in the international stock market. And the international stock market is not down. The international stock market is up 3%. So now you have options. You can decide whether to take your money from your crashed US stocks, which probably you're not going to want to do, or instead you can take the money from your international stocks. So with that in mind, you may be wondering like, well, why would you take on that risk? That's my own personal risk preference. You have to figure out what your personal risk preference is. Some people, even though the international market has not performed as well as the US stock market over the last decade, some people think that that means that there's more room for growth in the international market and they would rather take the risk of having lower returns with the potential for an upside of a lot more growth. You've got to decide what's best for you and what risk and potential reward you would like to take on. But that's really all I would do if I was starting out. I didn't start really diversifying my portfolio until I had the first probably $30,000 invested in my account. With just $6,000 and just starting out with that, there's really no reason to make it too complicated in the beginning. Instead, simplify it so that you're not overwhelming yourself, make it an easy portfolio, and then when you learn more, you educate yourself, you can start more specialized moves that are focused on maybe small cap, mid cap, value, or growth stocks. Let me know what questions you have down in the comments below, and if you've made it this far, thank you so much. Be sure you hit subscribe, be sure you hit like so you can see my next video. As most of you know, I am very active on social media, so be sure to give me a follow on Instagram and TikTok at @CloBearMoneyCoach. And that's all I've got for you today, so thanks for stopping by and I hope you learned something. See you guys next week.